Trauma rips us out of the cosmological context. We're torn out of a feeling of participation and belonging to the world.
This is the last thing I feel like talking about. I don't know what else to offer except for just to tell the truth.
I hid for quite a while. I compensated and we just stopped talking to people and stopped seeing people.
I think there's a lot of ways that people move through grief and loss. It's sort of stitching, you know, a space, a stitch, a space, a stitch.
This isn't the first time suicide came up in the documentary anyways.
We don't know what's going to happen in our lives. We may be cruising along thinking things are good, and you find out life isn't always like this.
The reality is that for most of us, when we suffer catastrophic loss, you don't get over it. You integrate it. You learn how to cope with it. You learn how to carry it, but you don't get over it.
It was very comfortable to not put myself into situations or experiences that would put pressure on me.
Grief doesn't want that. Grief invites us into the shadowed lands. As you know, we are taken into the underworld. It's a very different kind of reality.
I think people go through their entire lives holding that inside and watching all of the people they want to connect with running away from them. And they don't realize you have to feel it to let it go. It's not until you stand still, that's when the horses stop to look at you.
There is no bypass to this healing. We have to go right through the wound, and so I honor your courage to do so.
What ritual does and community does is it sutures the tears that happened in trauma. Unwitnessed pain was now being witnessed and held in a language older than words.
When did she like horses? One of the first things he did with Anastasia was horsey rides on his hands and knees on the way to bed. Come on. So, you know, who knows? It was really, really early, right? But there was that connection to her dad as well.
My dad actually introduced me to horses. We were camping and he had a friend that was living in the area that had a horse. I don't know how old I was, maybe 6 or something.
They said to her, "Do you want to go out and look at the horse?"
And he plopped me up and I had my first horseback ride, and I was honestly obsessed ever since. Everything was a horse. I was constantly pretending to ride a horse. Every little toy was a horse.
When she was little, she would always say, "What should I dream about tonight?" I had to give her a topic to dream about. So when I couldn't think of anything else, I'd say, "Dream about horses." And she asked us for a horse every Christmas. And we said, "We know nothing about horses and we don't have room for a horse. We'll get you horse lessons."
I started with 1 lesson a week, and at some point I was riding 7 days a week. I was there all the time.
She was a barn girl from the beginning, and so she just always just loved horses, I think.
So at the farm I was riding at as a kid, they started exploring equine facilitated wellness. They were counselors and horsewomen, and so they started combining the two. I was just super lucky to be around all these really brilliant people who were expanding this field in Canada. What started with just riding lessons at this farm, I ended up training in equine facilitated wellness myself. I attended every workshop that I could. I ended up doing my degree in child and youth care and my practicums at the farm, running groups for children and youth, working with horses and nature and art. And I was just very passionate about giving other youth the opportunity to experience the healing power of horses, because that's what helped me so much when I was a youth.
I don't even know what the question is, I guess, because you've known me for so long.
What do we mean when we say we know someone? So I didn't know very much about your story growing up, your narrative. And you did share, like we had really important talks along the way, that's my sense. But there's always two stories simultaneously unfolding. There is the explicit narrative that we create to make sense of our experience. And then there's the implicit narrative, which is the story our nervous system is telling. As I watched you growing up, I didn't know much of the explicit narrative. But I knew you from the implicit narrative, how you showed up at the farm, working with the horses.
Yeah, my dad was an alcoholic, and so life at home was up and down depending on his moods.
So sometimes there would be ease, openness, laughter, engagement, creativity, enjoyment.
He could either be really fun or really explosive.
And sometimes there would be fatigue, stress, nervousness, anxiety that didn't tell necessarily a big story, but said something about what might be going on in the moment.
So I ended up just spending a lot of time at the farm. It was my safe spot for sure.
When you're living in it, you spend a lot of energy trying to make it normal or make sense when it doesn't make sense. And I realize now that I just made a lot of excuses for it. You know, your dad's really nervous. He's high strung. He's got anxiety.
Growing up in a family with addiction, there's a lot of pretending that everything is okay, a lot of putting on a nice face.
Does it look normal? Okay, let's play normal.
You can't do that around the horses.
Horses love us when we're vulnerable. They soften when we're just ourselves. It's not true that if you're scared, you shouldn't be around a horse. It's just that you shouldn't hide being scared. The horse will tolerate the anger, the fear, the excitement, as long as it's not fake. And so that's why it's helpful. It's a place to really be yourself.
I met John in 2016, and he's now my husband, and he's a filmmaker.
We clicked on a level that was like, I just knew right away that this is my person. We were like just creating anyways, but we didn't know what we were creating. We didn't know where we were going. And then like we kind of landed on this place of like, oh, we should do a documentary. Like that would be really neat. But like, what the hell would we do a documentary on?
And I was working as an equine facilitated wellness practitioner. So I was doing mental health work with people and horses.
She's coming home every day, and like the story is like, you wouldn't believe what happened with my client today. So I'm trying to picture all this like as she's explaining it, and it's like,
is there any films about this? And we looked into it and there was nothing.
So when you guys said you were going to do a documentary, I thought, well, thank God, because I could not understand it. I would talk to people about what she was doing, and I couldn't explain it.
You might look out in a field and just see two people and a horse walking around together, standing together. Looks like nothing's happening. But internally, there's so much going on.
I know when you guys told us you bought a $500 van and you're going to travel across North America in it, I was really inspired by that, to just set out and not really know what it's going to look like in the end. That was just amazing to me. But she believed in it enough, like she really heartfelt believed in it, that she wanted to be able to bring it to other people.
That's what sparked the idea and got the ball rolling. And we left from Vancouver Island, traveling across Canada and the States.
we have no real safety net. We just don't know, but we figure if something horrible happens, at least we can fly home. We'll go home.
My work with my horses has allowed me to be more vulnerable and more open and more accepting, and to hold a sense of awe about how magic and amazing this work really is.
We were trying to show this work that is so hard to explain.
Attachment, and all attachment means is a science of relationship. So relationship, connection with other beings is the most important need. I was about to say human need, but it's the most important need of all mammals. And when it's not working, nothing else is working.
We get stuck in a cycle. Horses, when they're in connection with us, at some point jump into our nervous system and get on the wheel somewhere. So we feel supported in that.
Secure attachment is formed as I learn that I can move away and I can come back and I can find connection no matter what.
Just learning to occupy space where nothing happens is as or more important. You know, where you're just being with the horse and feeling. That is powerful in the grief experience.
I mean, the horses almost always know better than I do. And I just trust that now.
So why does it work? Because it's the why that helps us make an intentional treatment plan. It's the why that helps us talk about this in an educated manner. It's the why that helps us be able to research, even decide what we're researching.
If you're not real intentional about what you're doing and aware of what effect you're having with everything you're doing, you may be doing as much damage as you are good.
For many trauma survivors, it's the opportunity to start to build some kind of interpersonal psychic connection with something. Sometimes it's just safer to let yourself get close to an animal than it is to let yourself get close to a human.
If I look at the challenges that clients are facing, it all stems back to separation from attachments.
So the ultimate detachment in relationship is when somebody dies.
When we were still in Canada, a woman named Helen reached out to us.
And she had found incredible healing through equine therapy with her horse, Mara.
She invited us to come stay with her and her family in Wisconsin.
Sure. Okay, sure. Well, my name is Helen Crary Stassen, and I'm talking to you today about really being a suicide survivor.
She found the only way to get back into the world was when they bought a horse, and she started riding every day.
I think when a suicide of a child occurs, we were trying to make sense of the world, because the world as we knew it was totally blown away by this.
In the aftermath, we rallied very strongly in terms of putting a service together and getting him buried, and then it was after that period where I definitely think my mom started to have struggles and problems, and she really kind of withdrew from the world for a while.
I couldn't talk anymore. I didn't want to talk.
I wasn't living the grief the way she was. You know, she would bump into people on the street and then they'd want to talk about it.
I didn't want, oh, do you have kids? You get this kind of a thing? Which is an innocent question. And now that throws me into a tailspin because I don't know what to say.
Suicide is one of the most difficult griefs to digest. We're supposed to want to stay alive. We're supposed to want to live. So when we're confronted with suicide, it challenges our own premises, our own basic beliefs about our own life. Surely all of us have had a thought, a fleeting thought at most, maybe, or maybe a more chronic thought about, do I want to be here or not?
Do I still believe the things I used to believe? Do I need to develop some alternative view of the world? And what does it mean to have faith? Faith in a spirit, a God, in some other power?
There's a lot of shame around suicide, as if the ones who are remained have failed them, that it was my job to somehow keep them alive. I must have missed something. I didn't do it right.
Because it's very easy to say, I obviously let Benjamin down in some way as a parent, which I was not alert enough, I was not aware enough, I wasn't realizing some things that obviously must have been going on.
And collectively, we also don't know how to honor the ones who have died through suicide. We feel like they gave up, or they didn't have what it took to stay alive, that they were weak.
We live in this narrative that life is good and everything will work out and we'll all be happy. And I mean, I think that's culturally pervasive, and I think it's a story we tell each other. And I think that leaves us lacking when it comes to dealing with grief.
This is a great heartache for our time.
He was incredibly private and close, and you know, that I think is part of why it's so shocking, is because there was never indications that he was struggling with things.
The levels of pain that we're walking around with right now are so huge and so private that it doesn't surprise me when someone disappears.
The day my brother died, I was working, it was Friday, and I got some weird texts from his girlfriend saying, you know, Ben's saying weird things. So I called him and he didn't answer. And I finished up work and I went to the liquor store to get some beer, and I thought, you know, I'll just swing by his house. And he was gone. And she had said he was down by the river, so I went down to the river. And I came around the corner and saw the lights. And I knew, you know.
It's Benjamin. Sorry.
I mean, I was so confident that nothing was going on that I stopped to get beer and just almost drove home before, kind of just on a whim, I was like, you know, I should at least double check.
I didn't know how to handle the tremendous confusion. I buried myself in shame, and I buried myself in guilt. I might look the same, but I'm not the same person.
So in my role as an associate professor at Arizona State University, I study traumatic grief. I study those anachronistic deaths, those deaths that are untimely, unexpected, suicide, homicide, and the deaths of children. One of the defining characteristics about traumatic grief is that, in a way, it's too painful to stay in our own bodies when it happens. And so it's sort of this experience that takes us out of our physical body, and you sort of exist in this liminal space, you know, between the world of the living and the world of the dead. You can't quite make sense of the world, and it's quite painful to be in the physical world.
Grief is something that, I mean, it's a thing you feel in your body. Life as we know it just ended, and now I'm in survival mode. It's just the way it is, right? Anytime that my brain has to make accommodations for the fact that I'm in survival mode, there are some changes that happen there, and that's trauma on the brain.
So we know that things like ritual help. We know that social support absolutely helps. Psychoeducation helps. And I have found in my experience that what we call the non-traditional therapies are far more efficacious with this population.
I was a lifelong horse person. I was very lucky in that I grew up with my own horse, and I had a tremendous amount of confidence, I would say, on being able to manage a horse, ride a horse, enjoy a horse. It was very fun for me. When I went to college, she went away. I returned to horses very deliberately when I turned 40. So over, honestly, 17 years, I had a variety of horses by leasing them. And I enjoyed them, but it was always kind of with a little hitch because it wasn't my horse. When Benjamin died, our lives changed so dramatically that my husband Jay and I just thought we can't live with trying to make things work, accommodate things. We need to know what we really want and then really try to pursue that.
Of course, after Benjamin died, that was one of the issues, is how do you then re-engage yourself? You know, you've been so down, you've been so low over his death and how this could have happened. And I think that was an early step towards trying to re-engage with people again and try to share something with people.
I feel better with a routine. I love to get up and it's my dog first thing in the morning. It's preparing my day to be with my horse. And just the drive to the stable is a very beautiful, quiet route. That's part of my healing. I always kind of go with trying to have a plan. I try to say I have a destination, that we're going to go to a certain place. I definitely say we're going to go until I find what I think my photo is. Gus, he's looking at us already.
He's beautiful.
Yeah, he's 6.
Oh, okay.
He's a good guy. Hi, Mara. They know us so well and they know the gig.
She's energized by Mara. She gets really excited to go see her.
Well, meet Mara.
There's the horseback riding aspect, which I think may be a little narrower, but then there's the caring for an animal aspect.
What a good girl you are.
To come back from where she was in terms of her willingness to go out and engage with people, to now being at a place where she's actively seeking out opportunities to go out and engage people.
Meet Anastasia. She's 15. Yeah, she is such a good girl.
I mean, I think you have to say that's an amazing transformation.
On healing, good girl. Getting her from her paddock, grooming her, which is such a strong mutual care for each other relationship. Most days I want to ride and I want to go out, and that has become kind of my process. I've actually had people say, do you come every day? Yeah, I do come every day. I come every day because I decided she's my therapy.
We really became friends with the Stassens, and the fact that Helen was so keen on getting Anastasia on a horse, even though we had lots of time around horses, those little things we didn't get to experience much in other places on the road. Riding is something that brings her joy. So it really stuck with me that Helen created that space, and those little things when they came up really helped us in part of those processing moments where we needed to have a memory to go back to.
After spending some time at Helen and Jay's, we continued to interview people, and things at home were getting really chaotic. My parents were separating. My dad's mental health was very bad.
Then he started calling you guys.
At least once a day, multiple times a day, often.
It was Dad, and then it was, I don't know who.
You know it was Anastasia's dad, but you didn't know which one you were getting. You know, you could get the side of him that was kind and missed us and was interested in how we were doing and was kind of confused, honestly.
He could call like 2 hours later and be completely erratic.
very delusional and scared and angry.
He wasn't really remembering our conversations between calls.
Like it was somebody totally different, and I got the same kind of phone calls.
It was hard to support Anastasia in those moments because I didn't know what to do. Like, I've never experienced anything like that.
It was getting really scary. So this whole time that my dad's really falling apart, we're still trying to film this documentary. We're still trying to coordinate with people and meet up and interview them. It was getting harder and harder. Helen and Jay offered for us to stay at their vacation home in Arizona. So we made a big push to get there. We knew it was a place that we could just land and crash for a little bit, and invited my mom to come down. I was really worried about her. I kind of wanted her to get out of there.
We thought it would be a great reason for her to come down and visit us. We can kind of get on the same page and feel some, again, familiarity.
I felt like I was so far away from home, so it felt so good to see my mom. I think it was really hard on my dad. He saw that as I was maybe taking sides. He was so paranoid at that point, so he just saw us as all working against him in some way. After my mom went back home, we decided to try to find some wild horses that we had heard about.
We drove deep out into the desert, and it took us all day. We walked a little bit further than we probably intended, and all of a sudden there's a brown horse in the water.
It's Arizona, so the air is really warm, but it was evening, so the sun's kind of setting and the water was moving and flowing. I grass that's growing underneath the water. I was in a heartbroken place. I knew things were extremely bad with my dad. And I could just feel like the water helping to move some of that feeling through, washing it down. And as I'm standing there, I could hear the horses, and they come out from all sides and basically surround me. And I was watching this huge stallion. He was feeding a baby, his baby, I'm assuming. The baby was too young to put her head under the water to get the grass, so he was going and he was picking it and then feeding the baby with the grass out of his mouth. And it was incredible. I felt so peaceful. Like, I felt so peaceful for the first time in a really long time. And the next day is when we got the call that my dad died.
It was having to call you guys. One of the harder things, I think.
We got a phone call from Anastasia's mom that the house was burnt down and that Jim was missing.
But I just kept calling my dad's cell phone over and over and over and over and over and getting his voicemail. And then we got the call that they found his body.
That he had jumped from a bridge.
Yeah.
That he was gone.
I remember in that moment knowing that we were going to have to go back. And I remember not wanting that.
We left our van there at some friend's house and flew home. And that was the hardest plane ride of my life.
I remember feeling like I need to just stay so close and make sure that I can help her through that flight home.
I just couldn't stop crying. And it was just a really long trip home.
Do you want to know about the well Jim or the sick Jim? And I've been saying that since he died, really.
You know, when I was younger, he used to crank up the music in the house and be working on some kind of project, and he was full of life.
Like, he was really brilliant and had lots of different projects he wanted to do. You know, sometimes he would have an idea and I'd say, oh, maybe you could do it this way or that way. And I pictured just being able to do things with him and have these little projects that would come up.
In the woods. And I always laughed because I said, if you ever want to get rid of me, just take me camping and don't show me how to get out again, because I have no sense of direction. He liked to fish. He liked to show people how to go fishing. He liked to tell stories, funny stories about things. And he was funny and he was fun and he was loving, but he was always a little bit dark.
Yeah, he was very proud and very stubborn, and as his addiction and mental health increased, he stopped listening to music, and he was really isolated and really just got progressively more negative, really resistant to any kind of help.
If suicidal thoughts were logs on a fireplace, shame would light them out. And shame is what keeps people silent. So I'm a strong provider. I have all these expectations on me, and I can't tell anybody that this is what I'm suffering with.
I specialize in seeing people who have what are called shame-based disorders. And those are any kind of psychological struggles where the core issue is an issue of shame. And shame is the emotion we feel when there's a profound sense of inadequacy.
When our pains are encountered and no one witnesses it, it penetrates and sears us at the deepest layer of our story, of our identity. There's something fundamentally wrong with me, that this happened to me.
For a person to arrive at a place of pain, that they're really becoming serious about suicide, we also know that most likely some very hurtful, serious things occurred in that person's life that were unresolved.
What happens, especially in childhood, is basically the person starts to wall off, right? They just shut down parts of themselves. They try to do whatever works to stop the trauma.
I'd say, I've had you longer than your parents had you. Believe me when I say you're worthy, you're brilliant, you can do these things. And he could be a cheerleader for everybody else, but he never believed he could do any of it.
They miss out on the opportunity of learning who they really are, and they try to be who they think other people want them to be.
He was such a brilliant man, and yet he had no confidence, which when people first met him would never guess that, because he was confident. He seemed confident in a lot of things. We all saw the potential in him, and he just never saw it himself. He never felt, I don't think he ever felt worthy to live. And he lived for other people. He lived for his kids. He lived for me. He never saw any work around mental health as something positive. He could do those things to survive, and he could do those things for his family. When he went to Cedars for treatment for alcoholism, he saw that as a prison sentence instead of an opportunity.
Before he died, I had a phone call with him that was super raw, and I told him, I'm terrified all the time of you dying. I can't eat, I can't sleep. This is really hard to live like this, and I love you and I want you to live. This is my truth, and this is how I want to be in relationship with you. And I felt like I had that conversation with him, feeling emotional because I felt like that was his true self talking to me. It was kind of our last conversation,
And he said, I promise, I promise, I promise I won't do anything. I absolutely promise. I'm so sorry I've hurt you, and you can trust me. And like, I just so badly wanted to hear that and believe it.
I think he was fighting for control, you know, who's going to control. And he fought, I think, with all he could. Alcohol was a piece of trying to fight that. But in the end, it just was too much for him.
The conditioning for men is very hardcore around what we're allowed to express. Hold it together, suck it up, admit no weakness, show no vulnerability. I mean, there's many studies done that show even from infancy on, there's a prejudice towards teaching young boys that they do not need to be held, they do not need support, they do not need to be comforted, that somehow we are supposed to be able to endure all of that on our own.
The major reason that we know, again through research, why people don't talk about their suicidal thoughts freely is because they are concerned that they will be a burden on other people. And so they keep it to themselves. And that gets dangerous over time because we can only carry so much before kind of the dam breaks.
That's what men of his generation bore, was that burden of, I can't be vulnerable, I can't be weak in any way, I can't ask for help, and I can't not know the answer.
I wrote an article once called The Necessity of Defeat. And in the article, and in reality, still to this day, not a single man has come in here voluntarily. They come in here because they've been defeated by a divorce, by an addiction, by depression. They come in here because that heroic model has finally been cracked and they have been knocked off the horse. And that is a moment of grace if they can stay close to the ground, to stay on their knees long enough to really admit and to confess themselves fallible and vulnerable. Until they can do that, this wall shuts them out from the living experience of being a man among men.
It was just way too hard for him. And I don't know why. There was so much that he had to do for himself and just reach out for it. And yet he was so damaged as well. He just never felt worthy of any of the love that came his way, ever.
If somebody's thinking about suicide, they're in a heightened stress response. So we already know that when we're in a heightened stress response, our limbic system takes over. So for me, that's been always my comfort around those anger pieces or the selfish pieces. No, this individual was acting through the limbic system and saw no other way out of the painful situation that they were struggling with.
You know, I've learned to just kind of tell the story about, well, my husband burnt down our house and then he died by suicide the next day, and people look shocked, but it's just like, here it is. Here's the story. And do you want to know more? Because we can talk about more, you know. Yes, he was a good man. He just couldn't accept that he had mental health problems, and that's what killed him.
We have this myth that grief is something to be cured, to be gotten over, to be put behind us. The reality is that for most of us, when we suffer catastrophic loss, you don't get over it. You integrate it. You learn how to cope with it. You learn how to carry it, but you don't get over it. It's just an expression of love. That's what grief is.
And then we get the cultural messages. Are you still dealing with that? Are you still... I mean, it's been weeks. You know, that person died weeks ago and you're still dealing with it.
I can't tell you how many people with whom I work in the beginning say things like, I need you to help me. I need to get over this grief. This grief is awful. It's not really the grief that's awful. It's that your beloved died. That's the awful thing. The grief is the natural outcome of that. And so I help people stay with that and learn to accept their emotions beyond tolerating their emotions, we call it affect tolerance, beyond tolerating their emotions, actually embrace and demonstrate compassion toward their painful emotions. And then eventually those emotions, once they're internalized and we know how to fully inhabit them, then they can come out into the world when we're ready. And sometimes it's years, sometimes it's decades. But those emotions can come out into the world into something I call fierce compassion.
Because when we're not dealing with grief, we are dulled. We are flattened. We live in what I call a flatline culture, where the range of what we're allowed to touch and to feel and to express has been really collapsed down to a very narrow band of acceptability. And that depth, no, we're not really allowed to go there.
It was so hard to see her shrink. This is a person that when I first met was really larger than life and wanted to do so many different things. Her capacity for what she could do got tight. Not a lot would get out. It was very tense and quiet, and I could just see that was like the pain and the frustration and the anger coming up, but not really coming out. It was like watching her take a deep breath in and kind of holding it a bit, like, I'm gonna take this in, I'm gonna process it, and I know that's what she was doing. It was hard though on my side to be not sure of what you can do in those moments.
You have no answers for that. There's nothing I can say to them that will make that grief more palatable. What we can do is offer them the opportunity to not be alone with that grief.
It's so traumatizing. The thoughts are so hard to get away from, and you just don't get any relief. And so I would just not be sleeping, and John would lay next to me and say, "Remember? Do you remember being in the river? Do you remember how they smelt? Do you remember how it felt? Do you remember when they all walked out and looked at you?" And I could go back to that resource, and I could find like a bit of relief.
I can only think that the experience that you had built into your life over the years with the horses and how that wired into your nervous system and whatever contact you were able to maintain, because it was my observation that there was less contact with the horses during that time.
It can be one moment that, if you really take it in, can be a resource forever, for moving forward forever. You don't have to have horses every single day. And I didn't after that. I was kind of disconnected from the horses for a while, actually.
In spite of the less contact, all of what you had experienced previously was still available in your nervous system to some degree. You were much more resourced than you would have been had you not had that. That the horses had been a steady presence for a long time, even in the midst of challenging situations.
He did something the day before he died that is really unforgivable. That's a pretty extreme thing to do, to burn your house down. And he left us with nothing. I used to really envy people who talked about having a house full of things to go through when their parent dies, and I didn't have anything. He had put the photos into a box and put it outside. Everything else was gone. Completely destroyed. That was devastating.
I've seen what it looks like to give up and your family to be left with nothing, and to miss out on everything that they achieve and is possible for them in their future.
Because we expected to be together at this time, right? So it's the It's the grief of what could have been that hits me now.
I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free.
To be here today where we've seen that future unfold. We have 2 children, we've gotten married, and he didn't get to see any of it. And it's part of the grief that I've experienced in this.
Our goal in life was to be grandparents. So now I'm a grandparent, and I feel that. I feel that hole sometimes. Yeah.
Benjamin died in 2010. He was 21 years old and a junior in college. And we honestly did not see this coming at all.
Someone, like you're saying, who's a man who is more emotional than is probably socially normal and who doesn't have a lot of outlet necessarily, at least not that I was aware of, you know, could have had a ton of inner turmoil that just wasn't apparent to other people. And, you know, you'd never get an answer if you asked him.
We did not realize Benjamin was having clearly the problems that he was and dealing with some things in his life, and we've concluded must have been suffering bouts of depression that he didn't talk about.
Our traditional view of therapy is talking through your problems. So it's all top down. You're in your mind, you can go, I do these behaviors because of this thing that happened in my past. You could map it all out. But the trouble is that then people, even though they understand logically why they might still be doing these things, they keep doing them because it's in their nervous system, because it's a trauma response.
I had talk therapy for 2 years. Once a week I saw a therapist.
I mean, she was gone for a couple years, you know? And I mean, I was gone too, so maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed from the outside, but it seemed pretty bad.
She had lost her sense of adventure and her interest in some of the interactions you would think you would normally have with even friends and relatives.
The way that parents who've lost a child to suicide describe that loss in their body, it is not cognitive.
I felt like a cape of lead was just put on me when I heard Benjamin was dead and what had happened. And I can open that cape sometimes and like get a little air, but I feel like it's always there.
The physical pain of loss, and I can say from experience, it's like I'd almost rather you cut my leg off, right? The pain that you can feel in your body. And we just can't address that kind of pain sitting around talking about it.
You can be talking about it and replaying it and working at every angle, and it's not really making a big impact on your life overall. Being out with the horses, it's a bottom-up process. You're in your body, you're noticing what's happening right now, and you're still working on the story, or you're working on those issues that keep coming up in your life, but in a totally different way.
So everything we're doing, it's about calming the nervous system and reorganizing the brain and building connected relationships.
The first year with Mara was not easy. I always have been writing in a journal since I was about 15. I pretty much write every day. It's a way that I have processed. And I would write, I dread going to see this horse.
If we expect horses to engage with us, we must also be present. Because if we're just a numb body walking around and our mind's somewhere else, the horses aren't particularly interested in us. We have no reality for them.
I could tell I was holding it together. I would be able to spend time with her, and then I would sob all the way home.
It's when our mind and our bodies are aligned that the horses become interested and that they are wanting to engage with us.
The horses remind us to attend to our senses, and when we're listening to our senses, we're in the present moment. We're not in the future, we're not in the past, and so we can just be with what is.
When that happens, the horse will be attentive to me. So that's feedback for me. It tells me, right, that, okay, right now I'm here, I'm present. My mind isn't anywhere else. And that may last for a fraction of a second, right? But it's the beginning of being able to recognize that I'm present.
You're laying down a new neural pathway, a new way of being, and you get to practice that. You get to practice your best self over and over until it becomes familiar.
We both, honestly, had internal pain and stress and frustration. Mara was also in a situation of loss the way I was. She had just lost her home, the man who raised her, who she loved. And I took her and I moved her, and it was all different.
A lot of times, the client is helping the horse as much as the horse is helping the client, where both things are happening. And it's a real relationship that's growing and unfolding. We see really, really powerful things happen there.
You're out there in relationship with a horse with the same background as you, feeling how it feels to be assertive, set a boundary, and then notice how it makes your relationship with that other being better, not worse.
I really have felt Mara and I have come together because I have gotten to where I really relax and enjoy it.
She talked about how Mara B, her horse, was so healing for her that she had a desire to share it with the world.
I actually felt I wanted creativity in my life. So it's actually a year today, you guys, that I did my first blog post.
She talks a lot about how she goes into every day not knowing what she's going to post, but looking for something to post.
I'm not a phone person, but I carry my phone everywhere I go on my rides. Mara is awesome about we are out, we just stop. We look around, we like to observe. I like to see what is something new I can tell people about that day.
I'm not a horseback rider, but it's a way for us to go out and do something together, and I get to hike around, and then we get to have an activity together, and she gets good pictures for her blog.
It's so cool, you guys, because she connects with him. It's so funny, it's like she's with him.
And she gets super excited about it too. So then she has photos to curate.
It gives me my creativity where I'm able to sit down. It's super simple. I just like to share 2 to 3 photos and 2 to 3 sentences, and I call it Mara Moments because I just want people to have a moment of zen with an animal, with nature, with the weather, with kind of checking in. I don't really try to make it about me as much as that she can be your friend too.
It's awesome. I kind of feel like I got her back.
You know, Helen is obviously the primary recipient of that relationship with Mara and that time with Mara, but I also go there, you know, somewhat regularly, not as much as her. I spend time with Mara. I have come to really appreciate her own spirit and her own personality and the relationship the two of us have. That in itself helps me kind of get back on track, and that there is a reason to do something with this tragic event.
I feel like I want to share some of this experience, and I also want to support people around the subject of suicide.
So you got to figure out what is the best way for you to deal with this loss, with this death, and work on that. And you may find over time that you transition to some different things, as we did. But I'd say certainly you can read books, you can talk to people, but you have to find your own journey.
And people have kind of said, wow, I can't believe you have the courage to voice this. It's my reality. I can't deny this is my life of what has happened. And so I'm trying to explain that so that other people who maybe don't have the voice and don't have the accommodations that I do, to be able to hear.
Working on this project, this story, our story of loss and grief and healing in equine therapy, she has spent more time around the horses again. And things that hadn't been talked about in a long time start coming back, like the passions and dreams and ideas, and knowing that it's part of what she's been doing with the horses and how that has come back to her and helped her find herself again is like one of the most incredible experiences.
I really wanted to offer a grief ceremony to other suicide loss survivors. Funerals now tend to call it a celebration of life and like, let's just be happy and have a party and make it light and fun. And I think it's doing grievers a huge injustice. You're supposed to be sad. You're supposed to wail and cry, and you're supposed to be held by your community with one another. The healing is done together, and that doesn't happen anymore. We're doing it all on our own.
We all know loss. We all know sorrow. There's none of us that will ever be exempt from this experience of grief. But if we don't have a language for it, if we don't have practices for it, we don't really know how to express it.
We really tried to just create space for people to just show up with their grief. Nothing more than that even, really. It was quite simple about connecting to yourself, then connecting with the horses and just seeing what showed up.
Part of the beauty of ritual, and I am imagining too about part of the power of being in ritual space with an animal, is that we're allowed to become deranged. And what ritual does is it invites that other rhythm to come forward. I don't want to go into the ritual and come out of it the same way. I want to be shaken in that process. I want to be rearranged. So when I come out of the ritual, I feel different. I feel altered. And I'm guessing that's the same encounter that happens when you walk away from a meeting with the horse, is that you've been altered. You have been a bit deranged by that, being seen into that transparently by another.
That experience of being seen or felt or understood beyond language, beyond even our own species, really reflects something back, and sometimes can be illuminating some aspect of our own experience that may not be fully in our awareness or consciousness, but through that feedback, that response, that attunement, we see something about ourselves.
So part of what the ritual does, part of what the community does, is it says you have one job to do today. Release. Set it down. That doesn't mean get over it. That means set some of the charge down so you can also remember beauty. So you can also take a breath that isn't all saturated with pain. So you can still see that things are blooming and that kindnesses are being offered to you.
My name is Katie Scoons. I too am really feeling very honored today to sit in a circle with all of you. Grief has touched my life in many ways, both ambiguous grief and complex grief. Today, I am here to hold space for you all and to create a safe place for us to be with all that wants to come. Everything is welcome in our circle.
I really wanted Katie because I used to work with her and she's brilliant and I know she would do an amazing job, and she wanted to have a co-facilitator. And long story short, through word of mouth, we ended up connecting with Marie, who came all the way from Alberta just to facilitate this group.
I feel great wisdom in this circle. I'm honored to hold space. I'm honored to offer what I bring, but I'm very aware of the wisdom in this circle, and we are very much a circle. My father died by suicide when I was 3, and his death was left unnamed, untended, uncared for, lied to. He was buried in shame, and I was buried in shame. I know the grief is obviously still very present, but I'm very, very clear that my father and I will be doing this work together from here on out. I feel like this is an incredibly important opportunity to banish the shame, to banish the silence, and to pronounce our love for those who have gone in such a rupturing way, because the love never dies. So thank you very, very much.
Our psyches are waiting for that type of acknowledgement. We're waiting for that type of recognition that the work was done, then I can actually set it down.
So thankful for everyone who showed up and just the courage to do this on film. I feel like that's pretty incredible.
We feel that the level of pain I'm carrying is too big for another human being to meet me there. So that's why we have to become skilled in grieving. We have to become skilled in our capacity to build holding spaces that are potent enough to hold the most difficult of emotions.
In art making, the materials we offer as art therapists, they have their own medicine. The material is the medicine. And what I felt strongly about a couple of weeks ago was to bring muslin bags that held Alberta wheat. And this is the season of Demeter. This is the season of the mother who chose not to wither, but the mother who chose to return us to life.
I'm Brenda. I'm Anastasia's mom, and it was my husband, Jim, who died by suicide, coming up 6 years this month. So this time of year is a really tough time for me. It's not his death date, it's the leading up to his death date, because he was quite ill. He had a lot of mental illness. And it was very apparent in the end, and he was so shamed by that he literally would rather die than face those demons that he had. And he couldn't speak it, so we're going to speak it. And I'm proud of I'm proud of Anastasia and John for this journey. And yeah, thank you for being here.
The rupture of suicide is unspeakable. I don't think any of us can find words in the human language for that rupture and that ripping. When a fabric is ripped, it's called the rent. And my fabric was ripped. But claiming the healing, I think we need to really name the rip and the rent. And all of us are deeply ripped and deeply left with holes in our being, and on, in some ways, a lifetime journey of repair. So we're going to rip the fabric in two, and so that you have a strip for yourself. I find the sound very powerful, and it speaks to, I think, the felt experience that most of us live with every day.
Grief has always been communal. Through our entire story as a species, grief has been communal until now. Grief rips us out of that world. As you know, we are taken into the underworld. where it's shadowed and dark, and you have to learn how to see in the darkness. It's a very different kind of reality. And the real work in that moment is to learn how to walk in that shadowed place.
Does that feel like enough?
And encounter something that you return with a weightiness,
Where would you like me to cut it, Marge? Would it...
a depth that becomes a nutrient for the community.
Where would you like me to cut it?
Yeah, right about there.
There's something astonishingly healing about kneeling side by side with other people who are in the midst of the same state you are, which is grieving. You are weeping together.
I invite you to write the name or the name of the rip. Claim the rip. Claim the rent that our bodies hold, our bodies have carried. Feel free to put symbols on, colors, spirals, in any way that speaks, that lets the invisible rip be seen. This is my body. This is what I carry. This is what I've lived. This is my rip. And these materials are the invitation to heal, to walk maybe a little bit more softly through what seems extensively sharp territory.
And when you're ready, I'm going to invite you to put your fabric around the cedar. I really encourage you when you put the medicines on to let your hands choose. Follow what your hands want to choose. And then lay it down where you feel it needs to go. This is about just following what wants to be these beautiful moments that hold the sacredness of all there is. And we'll just witness. We'll witness and hold space for one another.
Missing. And that just breaks my heart.
And so the healing, claiming the healing, is my next invitation, our next invitation. And so I have brought each of you your own Muslim sack and an additional invitation to bring in the wool. I just cut 4 or 5 slits in my pouch and wove through my rip. And this feels to me like how we heal together, naming the rip and then coming together and weaving.
There's permission in that moment to say, I don't have a clue about how to take the next step. And I am utterly broken in this moment. And thank you for seeing me.
And then feel free to just walk around and find the right tree or the right fence area and asking for the intention to continue the healing, the weaving, the sewing, the mending, and the tending. In order to remember this time, remember this space, and remember what was brought to us, and to keep it very, very close so that we can do it again and again. So it really is in claiming the rent and the rip and naming it and feeling it. There is no bypass to this healing. We have to go right through the wound. And so I honor your courage to do so.
Part of the beauty of these grief rituals is that When you're grieving, you're never alone. Someone is always with you, not to take care of you, but to hold space for you, and then to bring you back to the village. And you're always welcomed when you come back to the village, and you're thanked. Someone says, thank you. I saw what you did. You did that for all of us.
When we do our healing work in our bodies, we're very powerful. We're spirit, but we're also of this earth, of this place. And those that have crossed over, they are delighted when we spend time in their company, when we invite them. And they're delighted because when we do our healing work on this planet, in our beautiful bodies that can feel the sun and hear the birds, and in that we do our healing work 7 generations forward and 7 generations back. So they're very grateful for your yes today and your agreement to heal with them and for those that are still to come.
I say that the mark of a mature human being is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by these two presences. Those are what become the elders. See, elders are someone who is shaped by repeated encounters with loss, who have learned to turn their face into that loss, not away from it. And they are remade in the process, so that you come back not bitter, but in a sense profoundly deepened by that encounter and deeply appreciative for the exquisite beauty that this life holds. Because there's no denial. You're not fantasizing about trying to be somehow exempt from suffering. You see that suffering is an absolutely essential part of being in this body. There is no escape.
Grief doesn't end in a certain time period. That's the other thing that's important for people to remember. This kind of grief, it's been 23 years for me since my child died. And there isn't a single second of any day, of any week, of any year when I'm not aware of the presence of her absence.
I know I will never lose that pain. That's really, the deeper pain is still there.
Because you see through the veil, you understand the world in a different way. The way I like to say it is my heart shattered into millions of pieces, shards, and landed softly in the world. And everywhere it landed softly, I'm gonna do some good, some little tiny bit of good. Because if I don't, what is this pain? What use is this pain?
It's having role models and mentors and and I wish for my cousin Michael that those things would have existed, because he struggled for a very long time as well. I wish they could have existed for your dad. What was your dad's name? Jim. So I wish they could have existed for your dad, Jim.
She loved her dad very deeply, and she was so close to him that it hurt her that there was nothing she could offer him.
I'll always be grieving because I'll always love him. So as long as I love my father, will be grieving him. So until I die.
So I'm going to invite you to each hold on to a piece of this yarn that links us together today, the wool in our circle. That joining and that connection comes. And we're going to untangle all those knots.
I was more of a supporter in all of this than a participant, but I went in thinking it'll be whatever it is. I didn't realize that's what was happening when the horse walked up to me. I just thought, I'll go meet her. And then it just unfolded so organically. I believed in it, but to experience it is totally different. It felt like a gift because I wasn't looking for it. I was hoping for other people to have it. This moved something for me. It moved something in my body or my soul out, and it was healing for me. I just felt peaceful, and I haven't for 6 years.